Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power. And I don't know if you were dancing off screen like I just was, but what a fun way to start this afternoon. Welcome to our March webinar. Throughout 2026, we are recognizing the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence. And we're doing that by boosting civic engagement, trying to build civic muscle, and expand civic imagination. Put another way, we want to help you find a way to be involved in what's happening around you and make our next 250 years a time that everyone can thrive without exception. If you're new, you might not yet know that Stories Change Power is here to help you reach hearts and minds, to make people think a bit differently and hopefully bring them to action. A big part of what we do is storytelling. And often when you're storytelling, you are sharing someone else's story. I invite you for just a moment to think about what that would be like for someone else to be publicly sharing your story. And if that makes you squirm a little bit, then you're making sense of the fact that that is a big responsibility and is something we take very seriously. We want to ensure that everyone who is sharing someone else's story does that with dignity. And to support you in doing that, we have 4 Wednesdays next month that we'll be meeting for a course called Ethical Storytelling. We keep all of our courses small by design so that you can learn with and from other people in the group. We will put a code in the chat. We have just a few spots left that can use a code that will save $250 off registration. And yes, that is more than 50% of the registration price, but that's part of our observing the 250th this year and really wanting to make all of our programming accessible to everyone. We will not say the code out loud because I think by the time people are watching this publicly on the recording, all those spots will be gone. So that is special for you who have joined us today. 4 quick reminders before we get into today's presentation. Number one, we have captions. They are on. Please use them if that is helpful to you. Number two, we keep the chat open throughout this conversation for respectful conversation among humans. If you are AI, we are in the process of kicking you out right now. If we have confused you for AI, please keep a watch on your direct messages. Respond to that if we've asked you if you're a real human. If you don't respond, we err on the side of caution and remove folks we take that seriously. All the chat is for humans who are here. That will not be shared publicly. We have questions available in the Q&A. There's a little box at the bottom of your screen. Anytime that you have questions, please put those there. It's easier for us to keep track of where there's questions instead of simply the chat and conversation, and we'll save those to the end to ask questions then. We will not read your full name, but if you prefer, you can ask questions anonymously, and then we will not read your first name either. So lastly, remember, this is a webinar, so you are off camera, off mic, off screen. Be comfortable, do what you need to do to be fully present. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome today a dynamic duo from Civity. Malka Ranjana Kopell, co-founder and CEO of Civity, has had over 3 decades of experience facilitating public policy, conflict resolution, and community engagement processes. She has served as the program officer for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, was the founding managing director of the Center for Philanthropy and Civil Society, at Stanford University, and is a senior mediator facilitator with the Center for Continuing Education at California State University, Sacramento. Welcome, Malka. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank
We
you.
also have Palma Joy Strand, who is the other co-founder and the research director of Civity. She is a professor emerita of law at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, where she taught the negotiation and conflict resolution program. Most recently, she was a visiting professor at Marquette University Law School. She also designs and facilitates conversations on race and belonging for teachers and parents in public education. Welcome, Palma. So glad to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
So webinar regulars are going to be surprised. If you can believe it, we are not doing a poll today. We are trying something different. We invite you to think about a conversation you've had where you connected with someone who is different from you. And that can mean anything and everything. It may be political, it may be geographic, it may be generational, whatever comes to mind. Someone who you connected with who is different than you, and then share one word in the chat that describes that experience. That it might have been fun. It might have been challenging, surprising. I'll quit giving you hints and let you think of your own word. But as that comes to mind, thinking about a conversation with someone who was different, then, what was it that felt like for you? I'm seeing some responses here, vulnerable. Thank you for that vulnerability and sharing that. Yes. If there are others who have things come to mind, illuminating, that's a beautiful word. And let me see, I'll pull up the chat here. Rewarding. Oh, I love that. Very good. Okay, so keep thinking on those. We welcome your feedback as you're thinking about that. But with that, Malka and Palma, I will hand over to you for today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Piper. It's really great to be here and welcome to all of you. Uh, Piper introduced me, but I just wanted to add a couple of things. I mean, how I came to this work, I'm Malka, and I came to the work through my work in community facilitation and conflict resolution. I met Palma probably 20-ish years ago. When I was a program officer at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and she was working in her community. And we talked about how communities solve problems. Started a conversation that we are still having today. And we really looked at the role of relationships between people and how people see or don't see each other in this problem solving process. And when people see each other as people, as real humans, those other processes go better. And we started Civity about 12 years ago to support leaders in communities to be relational in their work, to build social trust. And so we are a training organization, but we also help tell the story of a culture, of a world where we're all in it together and where everyone matters. So I just want to add my welcome and tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. Palma, you want to put up the agenda?
You see it?
I see the first slide. What we're going to, there we go. Thank you. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about kind of the why and how behind the Civity work, and then we're going to model some of the exercises that we do in the field: intentionality, moving from the head to the heart, and then we'll talk about the heart of the work, which is connecting across difference. So you'll get a chance to kind of hear the theory and observe some of the practice. So I hope you'll enjoy. Turn it over to Palma to start.
Yeah, thanks, Malka. I'm Palma Strand, as introduced, and we're going to start today with kind of modeling the first, kind of the way that we start our workshops, which is what we call our intentional introductions, or focusing on intentionality. And what we do is we invite people, and we're just going to do it with me and Malka. And Piper said she was game to do this today. We ask everybody to introduce themselves with their name, their organization, if they're coming from an organization, uh, where they're physically located, and then something that they do almost every day. So name, organization, location, something that they do almost every day. And I'll start. We always start by modeling what we're asking people to do. I'm Palma Strand. I'm the research director and co-founder of Civity. I'm physically today in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. on the East Coast. And something that I do almost every day is I have a family text. My kids are grown and in various parts around the country. And I have a family text with my kids and my husband that I post to or I read almost every day. Malka, would you go next?
Sure, thanks, Palma. I'm Malka Ranjana Kopell. I am the other co-founder and CEO of Civity, and I'm sitting here in my office in hot San Francisco. And one thing that I do almost every day is I take about an hour-long walk around my hilly neighborhood, and when I come back tired, I make myself a cup of oat chai.
Thanks, Malka. Piper, would you go next?
Absolutely. Thank you. So, my name is Piper Hendricks, and I run Stories Change Power. I am currently in an office space on a walking treadmill that I feel very grateful to have. So, it's not moving though, just standing at the moment. And something I try to do every day is something called morning pages, where I'll write in a journal just anything and everything that comes to mind. And it's been illuminating to see. Sometimes I don't even know that there's something that I'm processing, but as I start to write it on the page, that can be a really helpful way to get my head straight, so to speak, every morning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Piper. Thanks for being game to do this with us.
Thanks
Um,
for
so, so the reason that we do this is partly it brings, everyone's voices into the workshop, into the room as we're starting the conversation and the work. But we also do this because it helps to start really focusing on being intentional about relationships. And I'm going to invite you, I'm a big talker with my hands, even though I'm on screen. I'm going to invite you to kind of think of a scale from 1 up here to 10 down here, where it has to do with sort of kind of the level of the depth of the relationship that a conversation is in. So, for example, 1 up here would be the kind of conversation that we have when we're at a cocktail party and we're chit-chatting about the weather, what we think of as small talk. It doesn't really tell people much about who you are, or you can't really learn much about someone else through that kind of conversation. And then 10 is the kind of really kind of deep, vulnerable conversations that we mostly have with people that we're really intimate with, our close friends and family. And it kind of goes down. And we are aiming for, and we invite people in our workshops to be at what we think of as kind of a 2.5 to 3 level. It's kind of up here-ish a little bit. Um, so it's a little bit more than small talk. It's sharing something genuine about who you are and what's important. I think that Piper was right there with her kind of sharing something that she does and a little bit about like why she does it. And it tells us something about kind of who she is and what's important. I would say that mine about family text was maybe like a 1.5 or 2. And if I shared a little bit more, if I said, for example, my family's really close, and this kind of daily text is sort of like us kind of continuing to sit around the dinner table together, like they did when the kids were at home. It keeps us together on that kind of daily, but maybe not always that important kind of stuff, what's happening. That tells you something about kind of who I am and what's important to me. We say 2.5 to 3. This is not like an exact science. It's more a way to kind of think to yourself, oh, I'm going to be a little bit more intentional about sharing with another person, sharing a little bit, revealing a little bit more of who I am. Different people are different. Some people are more reserved. Some people are more forthcoming. Different cultures are different. Some are more, a little bit more buttoned down. Some are more out there. It's not really as I said, it's not an exact science. It's more just a way to kind of think about it. It can feel a little risky to be in a situation where we're used to kind of just not sharing much and offering a little bit more of a story. And what we've found is that if you offer a little bit of a story and then listen, people really reciprocate and really respond. So we really, as I said, really invite people to be at this place of kind of intentional authenticity and genuineness without necessarily going, we're not after the BFF, best friends forever kind of approach here. Um, so I think that I'll move on. I want to, as Malka said, we're going to spend a little time now talking about the why and how of Civity. So I'm going to share my screen again and um, go through some slides that we have to share. I'll kind of move on from the agenda. I just want to say a couple of words just introducing myself. Malka talked about how she came to the work. I came to the work from being a member of my community. I'm a lawyer by training, but I found over time that that working in my community, that kind of legalistic frame didn't really kind of fit what I was actually seeing happen. And what I found was that when people were in relationship, things moved forward. And when people weren't in relationship, particularly across differences, things got stuck. And so um, this word civity really captures this idea of the importance of people being in relationship, and particularly with relationship with people who are different. So civity is a word that we appropriated from the Latin. It's the same root as civic, city, etc. And we gave it the definition of something that's really important, but that there really wasn't a word for. A culture of deliberately engaging in relationships of respect, that's I see you, and empathy, I hear you, with others who are different. And the differences that we at Civity work on are all kinds of differences: race, economics, rural, urban, politics, immigration, etc. Anything that keeps people apart is a difference that we focus on. And we have a theory of change that really focuses on building relationships across difference, bridging relationships. There's a lot of research out there showing that when communities have these kinds of bridging relationships, they work better. And what we do is basically say, oh, let's operationalize this research. If we know that these relationships really help communities, it's the people in those communities that build those relationships. So we support people in building those relationships. This is what we think of as what we call sometimes civic muscle, which is the theme for this year at Stories Change Power. And so what we do is we really support people, a lot of leaders, local leaders, emerging and established, formal, informal, anybody who has a sphere of influence where they influence people. We support people in being relational and connecting across difference. What we do is as Malka said, we're a training organization. We do workshops and coaching. We do storytelling, because so often out there's that story of division. We tell an alternative story. We do research, and we have a whole section on our website for do-it-yourself Civity. And we also support Civity champions who are doing the work out there. What we do in our workshops is basically in three parts. We focus on intentionality. Already talked a little bit about that. We focus on authenticity, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then connecting across difference, which is the kind of the core of what we do. And we do this through stories. A story is the shortest distance between people. Stories really reach our hearts as well as our heads. And story sharing, storytelling, and story listening really create space for connection between people. We understand that many of the differences that we reach across are differences of power. And we really focus on the idea that we're not going to get rid of power dynamics, but that adding a kind of a relational horizontal dimension really complicates or makes the power dynamics more complex than they otherwise would be. The work that we do, this relationship building through story, is based in or has been affirmed by research. There was a Stanford mega study about 2 or 3 years ago called the Strengthening Democracy Challenge. And some Stanford-based researchers invited interventions to reduce partisan animosity and some other attributes associated with political divides. And they were looking for 8-minute online interventions to do this. They got 252 entries. They chose 25 to test. And our intervention, the Civity intervention, Civity storytelling, was one of the 25. And it tested, number one, at increasing social trust. Number 2 at reducing social distance. Number 4 at reducing partisan animosity. And number 4 at reducing biased evaluation of politicized facts, which is kind of not believing people who you see as different from you. And these results were durable over time. The moral of this story is that people really can change how they see each other. And when they see people telling stories, they look past what's on the surface. We have kind of 3 touchstones for the work that we do. The first is that relationships are foundational, really foundational to any kind of civic muscle or culture change. And we do this through conversation. When it comes to building relationships, conversation is action. Sometimes people are, like, oh, I want to get to the action rather than the talk. But again, when it comes to building relationships, conversation is action. The second touchstone is that connections across difference are really powerful. And we focus here on what we call the conversation before the conversation. A lot of times people are focused on, the difficult challenges, the big issues, the I believe this or I want to do it this way. Our conversations really focus on the relational conversations that happen and need to happen before those conversations. And the third touchstone is that individuals can transform communities. We take a systems approach to our work, and we really know that in systems, people are the system. And so how we interact with each other really affects what overall the culture or the community looks like. And partly we do that by offering this kind of affirmative big story that invites people to believe and act into the conviction that everyone matters. We all belong. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to Malka.
All right. Well, speaking of conversation is action, what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about one of the most important exercises that we do in our workshops. I'm going to talk about how we introduce the exercise, and then Palma and I are going to model it. And the reason I'm going to talk about how we introduce the exercise is because everything we do in our workshops, we hope that people will take into their own work. So I'm hoping that you'll see this exercise and want to use it. This is much of our work is, as Palma described, about a conversation. We put people in conversations, usually one-on-one conversations, because one-on-one conversations are the most powerful. And we ask people to exchange ideas. That's what a conversation is. I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something. And since we're talking about stories today, and we know how powerful stories are, for this exercise, which we call our head to heart exercise, we ask people to share their story by answering a simple prompt question: why do I do what I do? And this is a question that you can answer any way you want. We encourage people to do that, to answer it in 2 or 3 minutes. And we usually model how one of us would answer it. And the way the exercise goes is one person shares their story for 2 or 3 minutes, and then the other person does. We also encourage people, when they're in the listening mode, to take that role very seriously, because being a listener opens up the space for the person to tell their story. They know they're in a space where someone else is listening, and that is really a gift to them. So Palma and I are going to have a conversation to answer that question, why I do what I do. And normally we'd give ourselves a few minutes to think about it, but we've been thinking about it. And I'm going to start. So Piper gave kind of my more formal introduction, but really why I do what I do really goes back to when I was a kid. So I grew up in Silicon Valley, moved here when I was 8, and Silicon Valley when we came here was pretty different than it is now. So that was in the 60s, and My background is my mother is Indian from India, and my father was a nice Jewish guy from the Bronx. And at that time, there were very few Indians in Silicon Valley. So I felt like I was the only Hindu around, and that my two sisters and I were the only people like us. And as a naturally shy kid, I'm still shy. That made it even, that made it even harder for me to connect, and I felt left out. But what I started to do, because I was a good observer, is I put myself in the position of being, with one person at a time, which I could do, and talk and mostly listen, I should say. Um, just have one-on-one conversations. And I saw early on the power of that, the power of creating a space for someone to talk and share, the power of being included, and the power of including someone else. So, and to this day, that is my most favorite thing to do, is to sit down with one other person, usually over food, and chat. So that is why I do what I do, to bring that permission, bring that power to civic leaders, to show them that the power they have to connect to somebody is probably one of the most important things we can do. So that's my story. Palma.
Okay. I've been thinking about my story, and I think my story also goes back to just beginning to when I was a kid, but kind of going more into being an adult. So I really focused on this idea of difference. And when I was a kid, I went to the elementary. I also grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but in the East Bay. And when I was a kid, I grew up, as many white people do in this country, in a pretty much all-white neighborhood, and I went to an all-white elementary school. And then when I went to junior high school, they were actually desegregating. This is when this was desegregating the schools, and I ended up going to junior high school with a whole bunch of different kids who were African American, Chicano. That was the word back at that point. And also kids who were of Japanese ancestry and Chinese ancestry. And we were all going to school together, and it was really different. And I, over time, got to know kids who looked really different from me and had different language sometimes, different experiences. And I have to say it was a little daunting at first, but over time I realized that it was really really expanded my picture of the world and how things were. And then when I was halfway through high school, when I was going into my junior year in high school, my family moved to Texas. And it was very different. I was in an all-white school. And people were, this was like in the 1970s, people were quite a bit more conservative than I was. And they wore cowboy boots and they listened to country music, and it was very different. And I was very like, "Oh, who are these people?" But over time, I started to realize that those people were just kids, and that although we had often quite different views, that they were really good folks, or at least a lot of them were really good folks. And I think that experience also gave me this sense of um, when you kind of connect with people who are different, it really expands your world. And that if you kind of can go below the surface differences, that a lot of times um, there's a lot of commonality. So that's, I think, partly why I do what I do.
Thank you, Palma. So you each heard our story, and what we do after this conversation, after people are in these one-on-one conversations, and sometimes it's hard to get them out of them, particularly if we're in person. It's easier for on Zoom. We ask people to debrief their experience, and what they say is similar to some of the things that you said at the beginning of this webinar. Some people feel vulnerable. They they find it rewarding, interesting, illuminating. They learned about the other person. And many people find it surprising that in such a short period of time, you can not only learn something about somebody else, but you can make a connection. And the most important thing about this exercise is that people are doing it. We provide the frame, but the people are doing it. They're making the connection themselves. They're seeing that many of the things they know how to do with family and friends, they can bring into the civic sphere, and that they have the power to do it again and again. And if they're leaders, they can create opportunities like using this exercise for others to connect with each other. People are hungry to be heard, and it's just such a powerful thing to be able to offer somebody that opportunity to be heard. So that's this exercise. I'll turn it back to you, Palma.
Yeah, we find that providing people a little structure to connect really makes a huge difference and really makes it possible. So I'm going to share my screen again. I think I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. Talk a little bit about the third part of what we do in our workshops, which is connecting across difference. And the core of what we do is to really, again, invite people. As Malka said, those one-on-one conversations are really powerful for relationship building. We invite people into another one-on-one story with a different person. That focuses on a difference between them. And we have different ways of kind of preparing people to have these conversations. One of them is what we call our prairie grass exercise. This is a picture of prairie grass. And prairie grass, as you'll see, has roots that extend below the surface, actually even further than what you can see above ground, which is a lot like people's identities. And so we ask people to think of themselves and their identities as prairie grass and think about like what's above the surface. For me, I'm a woman, I'm a certain age, I'm white, but then what's below the surface, which is, many more things that make up the complex people or the complex personality and identity that people are. And then we invite them to share those identities with another person, identify a difference, and then tell a story about that difference. Sometimes when we're working with communities or members of one community, we ask people to, tell us, what are the differences that keep people apart in your community? And you wouldn't be surprised. A lot of those differences, keep people apart in many communities. Again, race, economics, politics, geography. We ask people to kind of identify themselves according to those differences, find someone who's different and tell a story about that difference. And what we find is that when people, tell a story about difference, they often discover a lot of commonality underneath. So again, we want to really emphasize that in the work that we do, it's really about supporting people like you. You are the people who make Civity happen, create Civity in the communities where you live and work. Most fundamentally, everyone can build Civity by practicing Civity, just by connecting relationally with people who are different from you. And we have, as I mentioned before, on our website, we have a whole section on a DIY Civity, and we have some tips for practicing Civity from, just what we call a Civity brush, which is just, a momentary interaction with another person, in your day, or a long sit-down conversation where you really, get to know somebody a little bit in a little bit more depth. So that's practicing Civity. Then there's seeding Civity. So we work with a lot of local leaders, and leaders have networks. Leaders have social networks that reach into the community, and leaders convene people, they facilitate meetings, they organize things, they create ways for people to connect with each other. And when leaders use those, those places to make it possible for other people to connect across difference, then they're really seeding Civity in the rest of the community. I'll give you a couple of examples. We worked with a fellow Tom in Louisville who was with the Compassionate Louisville organization, which was really aiming to bring compassion to the city of Louisville and have people be more compassionate. We helped Tom and Compassionate Louisville kind of take action to operationalize compassion, as it were. It's like we want to be compassionate, and Civity conversations are a way to do that. We also have worked with a team at the Center for Rural Affairs, which is an advocacy group based in Nebraska that works in the Midwest. And what we found is that this team, which is really focused on community building, they've integrated a Civity approach in their work across the board because, again, it's a very concrete, doable, everyday way for people to intentionally build community. Another example, we partnered with the Michelle at Leadership Rhode Island, which brings leaders together across sectors. And they realized that a lot of the work that they do, sort of taking leadership in the community or as community leaders, is really being leaders for building relationships across difference. And for this, the workshop that Malka did last summer in Rhode Island was actually featured on the PBS America at a Crossroads. So you can actually, if you go to that, there's going to be a link with later. You can really see what one of our workshops look like. The bottom line is that what we do matters. Each one of us can make a difference. Together, we can make change. And that's us. And I'm going to stop sharing again. And I think that brings us back to Piper.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you both so much. I am really appreciating these sample exercises. I feel like we got little snack-sized versions of way to connect with people. I particularly love the notion of a brush, a quick, I can just imagine, kind of you might brush past somebody, or you can see that as an opportunity to connect. And I will credit my mom right now, who is just absolutely a superstar at, the number of stories she has of connecting with people in the grocery store and just brightening a day. It's just she gives new life goals for me there. As I mentioned at the top, we are focused this year on helping people build civic muscle. And you've touched on many different ways. I want to really hone in. What would you say to someone who says, how can I be part of making the United States more just and peaceful for everyone without any exceptions in our next 250 years?
Great question. And I can start. We take a systems view of Civity. We see our culture, our country, our world as a complex adaptive system where we are all nodes in the system, all of us, and in relationship with people who are in relationship with others, who are in relationship with others, etc. When we say you can make a difference, we really mean it. I mean, that one person can talk to another person, and what happens between them ripples out. And when people ask us, a lot of people ask us, what can I do? What can I do? One of the beautiful things about this work, the thing that gives me joy, is not only can people do something about this, not only can individuals do something about changing culture by changing our interactions, but we are the only ones who can. And that is really what we can do. We can build the relational infrastructure that supports the institutions that we create, that supports the policies that we support or don't support, that support the people that we elect. But underneath how we are with each other, ripples out into all of those levels. So that is what we can do. We
Yeah.
can connect.
Yeah, let me just add there that in thinking about this and in kind of doing what Malka's describing, it's really helpful to think about. I find it really helpful to think about our spheres of influence. So I think sometimes people, think about how can we change. It's like such an overwhelming task to think of, well, changing the culture of the country. But if you think about your sphere of influence and you think, well, who do I talk to? Who are my coworkers? Who are my neighbors? Who are the people that I see at the sidelines of the soccer game? And think, or, Piper, I love your mother example. Like, who do I see at the grocery store? Who are the people I see at the coffee shop that I can intentionally take this approach of being relational and really seeing people as people into the sphere of influence that I work through every day. And that makes it a lot more doable. And if lots of people are taking that sphere of influence approach, that really, really leverages change.
I love that. And you both were anticipating my next question. I wanted to dive in because you said something that really stood out to me is people are the system. And it's true. There's times we can just say, oh, this system as if it's something so external, but all of us are part of it. And it's interesting because some conversations I've had recently have been, obviously every day I'm waking up thinking about stories and power, but sometimes we don't recognize our own power. The stories we're telling ourselves are, gosh, I wish somebody would make this change. And we're talking about folks, if you are the assistant deputy secretary of something, if you are the vice president of a particular organization, if you, I mean, there are people who are in, you're in a funding position, like that is power. And so how are we using that in this moment? So it could be something small in the grocery store that then has a beautiful ripple effect. It could be something that's a bit more, central into what we're seeing as a bigger system. So I want to note really quickly before I go further that we've had some Q&As or some Qs come in. I would love for more. So folks, don't be shy. There's that little box with the question mark, and we will share the presentation. We will share the slides. There was also a question about the pro-democracy narrative playbook. That is something I will share in the resources as well. That's open to the public. And then their question about media outreach and things. I'm not quite clear if that was a question for us or at Stories Change Power or Civity. So if you want to clarify, we'll look for that. In the meantime, as folks are adding their questions, I want to dig in a bit more because we're talking, I mean, we're talking big changes. And so I think some folks may still feel a bit discouraged by the enormity of the changes that are needed. Can you give us a bit of hope this Friday afternoon? What would you say to folks who feel like a little daunted still?
Well, again, going back to that idea that you can change what you can change. But I think that also thinking about hope, one of the things that we really focus on is, and it's appropriate that we're here with you, is the story. And there really is this kind of story out there of, we can't do anything. It's bigger than us. It kind of a story that's kind of designed to make people not do anything, to kind of be hopeless and, I'm just going to go home and, just forget about it. And that this, one of the things that Malka and I am sure that you do as well, Piper, we talk to people all over the country who are not shutting their door and saying, I can't do anything. And they are doing what they can do where they are. And they're making a change. And so when you see all the change that people can make and are making, that story of possibility is not just a pipe dream. It's a story that's really grounded in what's happening. And that to me is incredibly hopeful.
I want to add kind of the power of the local, right? A lot of these stories that are coming down, they're coming down from up there. They're coming down from a meta level, but the power of the local uh, ripples up. And it's actually, I mean, we are a national organization, but we work locally. We work in communities with local community leaders who are doing things in their community. And the story of connection, that's where it's happening. because when people are in the same place and depend on each other for, you know, for their life, for uh, the local institutions, the local supports, the local activities. That's where it happens. And so there's already a a basket for people to sit in. There's already a possibility for connection. So, but you can strengthen those local relationships. You can build new local relationships, and you can repair other relationships. And that is really that's the place where it has to happen. But it's also the place where it can happen the most.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many great groups. I am encouraged every day by the number of organizations working
Mm-hmm.
in our own way to move us toward being more just and fair as an entire country. And one that comes to mind is the Frameworks Institute, who's done a lot of great work
Mm.
around this notion of
Stories.
stories,
Yeah.
yes, and as I work with people a lot who are in a communications role, formally or informally, it's easy to say like, oh, the system is broken. And if we say that, there's times we may inadvertently be sending a message like, exactly counter to what you're saying. Like it's people, we still have that power. And so being mindful of how we're framing. I think another thing that is challenging is we talk a lot about how we need to complicate the narrative is a phrase we'll hear quite often. And it's that too can be challenging where yes, that things are more complicated than a simple it's all good, it's all bad. But sometimes in that we may inadvertently overwhelm people. And so having these examples at the local level of here's someone who's taking action and here's the difference it's making is so encouraging. And so all the things I feel like sometimes in communications there are a lot of things we're navigating. Curious if you have examples of ways to share the stories of hope, not oversimplifying, but also not discouraging.
Well, I want to pick up on one thing you said, which is complicating the narrative. So we talk a lot about uh, complicating the person.
Mm,
I think where a lot of these stories of division happen, or how they can gain traction, say, is that people paint another person as one thing, just one thing, and if that thing is bad, just one bad thing. But people, of course, are much more than one thing. We're all many things. In fact, we all think we're complex human beings, but so is everybody else. And that's really we try to show in our workshops that the person that you are talking to, and particularly when we move into the exercises around difference, that even a difference that you think you have with one other person, there's not just one difference. We're all different from each other in many ways, and that is those differences are important to people. They're part of their identity, just like my differences are important to me. And that seeing the other person as all of those things uh, is is that is one of the most wonderful and powerful things that you can do. So I think that seeing the person as complicated also complicates the narrative, right? The narrative of just of us versus them, right? Us versus them only works as one us and one them. And I think the way so you ask kind of how to get these stories out. The we talk, we all talk a lot about process for getting stories out. But I have to say that a lot of you know, and this goes back actually to the Stanford study, kind of people's uh, 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 changing, building trust so that people believe other people, that
mhm.
even getting the stories out, that the listener is not going to believe you unless they trust you. And so this trust building is not only uh, building trust because it's good to build trust, but it also helps get the story out. Trusted messengers are listened to, and so what we can do is in our, all of us connecting with someone, changing the story between us but that also helps us be more listened to, that so that when we say, I just had a great conversation with this person, I did not expect that because this person represents a group of people that I wasn't sure I trusted, or I'm not sure is always seen, or or known, then that's how we get the story out.
Yeah, well, I want two things. One, somebody just put in the chat the danger of a single story, which
Yeah.
is Chimamanda Adichie's amazing TED talk about the danger of a single story and the power of complexity. But I also just want to say that, it's kind of a little counter because we complicate the narrative, and yet storytelling is such a basic human, innate, simple, accessible way of complicating the narrative, and something that everyone does. Everyone tells stories, everyone hears stories, everyone connects through stories. And so, on the one hand, we're complicating, we're seeing the complexity, and yet the vehicle for it, this, kind of telling of stories and listening to stories and sharing of stories, whether they're person to person stories or sort of larger stories, this is like at the core of kind of what people do. And so I think it's important to kind of remember and kind of focus on that eminent doability of complicating the narrative, because anytime there's a story, it's complex.
And I'll pick up on the thread of trust and how important that is. I think a lot of folks recognize how in this, current environment, getting people's attention is no small thing. I mean, it is really in short supply. And obviously there are times that we'll sit down. I'm curious if folks are watching, multi-episode, multi-season shows, we still do have attention for things. But to get, but away from those, to draw their attention to something else, it takes a lot. And along with that, as you're saying, it's a trust economy. If we see levels of trust in Congress and institutions in general on decline. And so really taking that seriously, where it's not enough to have a phenomenal story, an important message. You have to be trusted to have people listen and take that to heart. So, and we will include, I have to say this at least twice in every webinar, we will include that in the resources. So thank you, Crystal, for the danger of a single story. We'll include that TED Talk as well. Still open for Q&A as folks have questions. Would love to hear from you. I want to be sure if there is one thing, because we have covered a lot today, if there's one thing you want people to remember, what would that thing be?
Well, I would say just remember that you have the power. This is something that you can do. I mean, I'll take that. I'll go back to Piper. I'll go back to your mom at the grocery store. This is from the very, you walk by somebody on the street, maybe somebody who's a little different from you, and you say, "Hey," or "Hello," and that just that small thing says to that person, "I see you." You're sending a message about being relational, all the way to sitting down with, that person who, maybe you've been in meetings with them or you've encountered them and you feel like there's somebody that is a little different from you, interesting, take that leap to say, let's have coffee. These are things that might feel a little risky, but one of the things that we found is that if you say to yourself, "Oh yeah, this is a little risky, but I can do this." It's very doable. So I think that this sense of these are things that people can be intentional about doing in their everyday lives. And this is something Malka and I talk about all the time. Since we started doing Civity and being more intentional, not like we're Civity paragons, but being more intentional in our everyday lives, it's amazing how fulfilling it is. It really does change what comes back at you. And that's really, it's powerful.
Yeah. And I second that uh, hugely. And I just want to call out one of the messages in the last message in the chat. Um, Reminds me of a quote I heard years ago when working with the National Civic League. And I also worked with the National Civic League, which was something like, we can change the world only one person at a time, starting with ourselves and in our own little corner. And that is so true. People that think, well, people call me an optimist. I got into this work because I believed and believe in the power of people. But I would say, yeah, I'm an optimist, but it's based on data. I every day I see people that make me feel that this is possible, this can happen. And that is why I'm in this work, and that is why I love this work, and this is why I believe in it, because I really do believe uh, that we can do it, and that we are the only ones who can. And I see it every day.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. I'm reminded. So before the pandemic, I taught group fitness classes, and one of my favorite things to share with people is the human body is the one machine that can get stronger the more we use it, assuming we're doing that properly. And I'm reminded here as we talk about civic muscle that we can get that stronger as well. And I love, Palma, as you're saying, I mean, it can literally start with something as small as hello and just
Mhm.
greeting someone rather than, staring at our phone or just walking by. And so I'm picturing that as like the 1 pound rep, and you do enough reps of that hello and then start growing. And we're, there's no guarantee that every response is going to be positive. There may be some where someone doesn't hear you or they're in a bad mood or whatever it is, that's happening in their life. And hopefully that the story we tell ourselves is something like, oh, that's, there's something going on with them. It's not that there's something wrong with my saying hello. And then bit by bit we can grow that muscle to be stronger and have more interaction. So just like
I
our
think that, I mean, I think that the civic muscle metaphor is such a great because
Yeah.
what you're saying, Piper, is so it's like we exercise, we walk every day or whatever we do to kind of stay healthy and be strong. And it's the same thing with these relationships. It's
yeah,
like connecting with people, particularly people who are different, in a way that says, you're a we're fellow members of this community. That's building civic muscle.
Yeah. And people are always asking us, well, what should I say to this person? And really, you don't have to say anything. Just listen, because most people don't get the opportunity to be listened to.
amen. I definitely, I think sometimes there have been a few times I'll start a conversation and then end up, like 95% listening, and you think, I think somebody really needed that
Yeah.
listening ear. And then
Yep.
sometimes maybe
Yep.
we're the 95% talking. It just it depends on the day. So
People are hungry to be heard.
yeah.
And listening is a really powerful way to connect. And sharing your story is a way to invite somebody to tell their story.
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful, I just really appreciate you both. This has been such a fun conversation, and I hope folks will take some of these skills. There were so many that the nuggets that we shared today and take them into the weekend and week beyond and months beyond to practice. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We will share links to learn more about Civity's work, including the studies that they mentioned and places to learn more. We will also share the code for the ethical storytelling course. Would love to see many of you join us next month. Feel free to share that if there's people you think could benefit. Next month, we will be getting back together on Arbor Day. We'll be looking more inward again. This is a theme for these few months with Dr. Omni for a conversation about deep exploration within ourselves. And we always value your feedback. There will be a poll that pops up as you log off. Please take 15 seconds or so, give us feedback that helps inform the series. Until next time, do good, be well, stay happy and healthy. And thank you so much again, Malka and Palma. This was an absolute joy.
Thanks, Piper.
Thank you.
Great to be here.